name is Lori Cole, and I am working on a master's in special education at Arkansas State University. And my research project was use of peer-mediated instruction and intervention to improve classroom performance for students with autism spectrum disorder. I had learned about PMII, the peer-mediated instruction and intervention. I learned about that in my positive behavioral interventions class that I took here at Arkansas State University, and I remembered it when we started talking about autism when I started taking this class, and I noticed that it was one of the 27 evidence-based practices that the National Professional Development Center on ASD had identified. And so I was interested in how it could be used to solve a problem that we have at my school. The problem that we currently have at my school, particularly with the ASD the kids with ASD, is that when they're in the general education classroom, they just are kind of sitting around a little bit, and they're not doing anything. They're not engaging in the classroom. It's not that they're not engaging with their peers, they're not engaging with the academic content at all. They're just not participating in the class at any level, verbally, non-verbally, any level. The teachers feel like they're just kind of sitting around waiting on me to show up to pick them up because they feel like the kids think that they get all of their instruction that they ever need in school in my classroom, and that's just not true. Most of my kids, the most I see them is 150 minutes a week. And so it would be impossible for them to get all of their instruction from me. Even if I don't see a kid for math, for example, he would just sit around in the math classroom and not do anything. So we're really focused on trying to work on this general education classroom engagement issue. So I had looked at this PMII again, like I said, back in another class, and I really wanted to see if it could be used for academic engagement. So I wanted to look first at the prevalence of autism, and so I looked at the prevalence through the CDC, and it has gone up. There are more kids who are being identified. 1 in 59 are being identified now, whereas before, that's more than was before in 2012. Also, something I found an interesting correlation a little bit later on in my research was that boys are identified more than girls as having autism spectrum disorder. And then what I was noticing in my research, all the research that I did, most of the studies used boys as their subjects. So all of the studies had boys. There was 1 girl in all of the studies. And so that would be an interesting area, I think, for further research. Is we've got some good data on these boys, but what about the girls? And so I understand the correlation between there are more boys than girls, but are the results that I saw in the research also valid for girls? So that was an interesting correlation that I saw. I also did some research to see, because I wanted our textbook mentioned about IQ and their intellectual capability being low, and that 75% of the kids who have ASD have below average IQ. So I wanted to get some updated information on that, and I found some studies that differ from that, but not that much. So I found one study that showed that it was about 60% were either borderline or in that intellectual disability range. So that also might have something to do with their academic achievement. What was most important for me out of that piece of research came that she found that it was more important for students with ASD to be in the general education classroom, and that their scores were higher later, and their academic achievement was higher in later measurements if they were not placed into a special education classroom. So the use of PMII would help with some of those behaviors that general education teachers see that make them want the kids with autism not be in their classroom. So, or it makes them difficult to be in their classroom. I'm sorry, it does not make them not want to have them. It just makes it difficult for them. So I did some research, and one of the I thought the creative ways that the researchers thought to change academic engagement, to change that academic piece, which is the classroom performance, which is what I was most concerned about, was to target off-task behavior. And so one of the research studies that I read used peers. They taught peers to recognize off-task behavior. They taught peers verbal and nonverbal ways to redirect their student with ASD, and also to positively reinforce their student with ASD. They wanted it to be more nonverbal instead of verbal because they didn't want the teachers to be interrupted any more than they already were by students who were off task. And so they trained the peers when they saw their student with ASD not paying attention. The peers would just tap their desk or tap the material to get their student's attention, and their student would go back to doing their work. What the research found in several research studies, was that the students with ASD had less off-task behavior than their non-disabled peers who were also in the classroom. And so that definitely helped their classroom performance. And it was interesting to me that their off-task behaviors fell below the level of the off-task behaviors of their peers in the class. One of the other things that I was interested in looking at was a program called Power Pals, which brought the kids in, typical peers and students with ASD. It brought them together in more of a discussion. And for me, classroom performance and engagement, I'm a literacy teacher, so that also is that speaking and listening part. And I found this to be very intriguing, that bringing these kids together not only helped them socially, but the communication aspect, that give and take, which we know is a struggle for some students with autism spectrum disorder. So this Power Pals program, they chose some peers, typically developing peers, and they had them meet for about 4 weeks at lunch, one time a week, and they talked about what it would be like for their students with ASD. Were they bullied? How would it feel? What does it look like? And after about 4 weeks, they invited their students with autism spectrum disorder to join the group. And what the research showed, and an adult facilitated this group, and they started discussions, and they would discuss things like, how do you get your lunch, or good eating habits, or how can you show people you're mad, just some general discussion. And then they would do an activity, or they might play a game. And what they found with this research study was the huge impact that this particular project had, not only for the students with autism spectrum disorder, but for their typically developing peers. And that these students started communicating outside of the school day. And again, I'm a literacy teacher. And so for me, that's huge, because these kids are communicating. They're using their speaking and listening skills, which is a big part of our curriculum. And so it was so successful that the school district implemented it in the junior high and the high school. This was done in a very small rural school district, which was something important to me because I teach in a very small school district that doesn't have a lot of money. We're outside of a huge school district here in Central Arkansas, and this was done with very low cost. It had admin buy-in. The teachers loved it. Everyone loved it, and it was simply meeting one time a week with a small group of students during lunch, and it has taken off in that school district. So for me, that is something that I want to try at our school district. I also want to implement looking at finding some peers and teaching them about off-task behavior and pairing them up and having them help their peer stay on task. Because I think if their peer can stay on task and they understand that someone has some high expectations of them and they have a peer that can kind of guide them through that I think we would see some changes in that behavior. So those are my goals. Some future research I would like to do would be to do a little more research and find other studies that talk about academic engagement. I found a lot of studies that had to do with social and how much it helped with social growth, and I found some about academic engagement, and I would like to be able to research and find some more. Additionally, I would like to spend some time and look and see if I can find some studies that used girls as subjects, and I know that those will be few and far between because of the prevalence issue, but I would like to do that. So I appreciate you. Thank you so much.